Tweeting his support for the UK last night, saying this: whatever the United States can do to help out in London and the UK, we will be there. We are with you. God bless. And he fired up a few more tweets this morning, catching some people's attention. Daniel Halper is the contributing editor for the Washington Free Beacon. He has seen all the tweets and now joins us. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
Okay, so you know some of the other tweets. Let's go through a couple of here. He says we must stop being politically correct and get down to the business of security for our people. If we don't get smart, it will only get worse. He went on to be critical of London's mayor. London's mayor spokesman has said what he said about the London mayor was taken out of context, and that this guy has better things to do right now than to worry about the president's tweets.
Yeah, look, substantively, obviously, President Trump's critics will find plenty to criticize, but I think on the issues, I mean, stylistically, they'll find there's plenty to criticize, but substantively, there's actually a lot there, which is that our current terror policy in America and abroad in the UK is clearly not working. These, it seems so regular and so routine at this point to have these kind of terror attacks, and at least somebody's running around with his head on fire and trying to prevent or trying to figure out ways in which we can change our policy in order to make some sort of change. I think that would be welcomed by a lot of people who are concerned that this kind of terror will come to America and are concerned about it spreading in Europe like wildfire.
And there's so many things there that the millions who supported him in the election and now love about him because he's plain spoken. He says things that they're thinking and maybe they feel like in the past they couldn't say in such a way, and they like that he's just going head on at this issue. But at the same time, on the other side of that coin, the people who did not like him, it upsets them as much as it makes the other side of the coin happy.
Right. Well, that's the story of his presidency so far, is that the people who don't like him will continue not liking him. The people that do like him continue to like him. But I think he needs to take this issue further, right? It's not just saying we need to fight terrorism. He needs to lay out specific ways to fight this and prevent this. What we're seeing, especially like in this London attack, it's not at all a complex attack. Anybody has access to a car or to some sort of vehicle, and driving it into a crowded area and then knifing people. This is not sophisticated, and therefore can spread more and become more prevalent just by the nature of the attack. And so then combating it becomes more complex. So I think he needs to figure out a way to do this beyond the travel ban. Travel bans may be one thing, maybe it is effective in some cases, maybe it's not. We don't know yet. But even so, that's not enough. And by his own admission, there needs to be more done. He needs to lay out how he plans to defeat ISIS and these terrorists. And I think focusing his presidency on that as opposed to the scandals here in Washington might be a good way to try to bring other people.
Well, I want to ask you, though, about another thing that he's going to have to confront this week, which is going to be the former FBI director he fired. James Comey is going to be testifying in an open hearing at the Senate on Thursday. What is your take on what we could learn? Because a lot of people say, listen, sometimes it's a nothing burger, but will he talk about pressure that he may allege the president put on him to stop investigating General Flynn?
So it's possible he won't testify. President Trump can invoke executive privilege and prevent him from testifying based on their private conversations. It seems likely that he will, that President Trump won't invoke that. Either way, it's obviously going to be a story. I think he will talk about that, as the stories previously have indicated that he will say that President Trump pressured him. I'm not sure he'll say much beyond that because there's still an ongoing investigation, and he's going to say, look, there's both an ongoing FBI investigation and then this Robert Mueller investigation. I think he's going to defer a lot of the tougher questions and more interesting things to that, but it obviously will be very, very political and create a lot of news.
It absolutely will. All right, Daniel Halper, good to see you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Journalist and author. We were talking in the commercial break, Mark, this is not new. You're not surprised.
You've been talking about this for years, Mark.
Yeah, and the problem is that it's not a native problem to England, Ireland, Scotland, Europe. This problem was imported. So the first thing you have to do is stop importing it. And the reality is that in Britain and in Europe, more people who agree with this ideology and a smaller percentage who want to do what these guys did yesterday arrive at the airports and ports every day. So the first thing someone like Theresa May needs to do is to stop importing more more of it.
Mark, in your book, America Alone, I'll never forget this statistic. You wrote about how the most prominent boy's name of a newborn boy in London today, 3 times over, is Muhammad.
Yeah, and not just in London, but in England and Wales. And people say, oh, well, it's if you have Mohammed with an O and Mohammed with a U and Mahmoud, it doesn't. No, this is the biggest source of population growth down the spine of the United Kingdom in every major British city. Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, Bristol, all the way to London. And the question is, the problem for Britain is, and for Europe, is that there are people who agree with every objective of these crazy guys last night. They want to live under Sharia in the United Kingdom. They want the flag of Islam flying over Buckingham Palace. They want death for apostasy. They think that homosexuals should be executed. They think that women should be covered from head to... You can agree with all that, and as Theresa May sees it, still be a perfectly functioning, respectable citizen of a modern Western society.
Well, you mentioned Theresa May. We heard from her this morning, the UK Prime Minister, probably the strongest we've heard her on terrorism. Of course, she's got that election coming up in just a few days. But she talked about political correctness, and she said that there's been too much tolerance when it comes to extremism. Take a listen to what she said.
While we have made significant progress in recent years, there is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. So we need to become far more robust in identifying it and stamping it out across the public sector and across society. That will require some difficult and often embarrassing conversations. But the whole of our country needs to come together to take on this extremism.
Have they made significant progress?
Well, no, I think that use of that word, extremism, is actually, that's embarrassing, Mrs. May. That's a ridiculous term for it. The pop star Morrissey from Manchester last week, he said, well, what do you mean, an extremist? An extremist what? An extremist bunny rabbit? In the heyday of the IRA, there was no problem about identifying Irish republicanism for what it is. You can't deal with an enemy unless you identify the enemy, and that was a much smaller problem between, you know, people who had a lot more in common than we do with those guys last night.
So then how do you stop it? I mean, you know, naming it is one thing, of course, but then getting in there, we talk about the unemployment rate. I mean, they're desperate, right? These young boys are desperate.
No, they're not. They're not desperate. I disagree with the General on that. If you look at Manchester, there's a high unemployment rate because you don't have to work. The guy who pulled off the Ariana Grande thing, he used his student loans from British taxpayers to fly to Libya and train to become a terrorist. So he blew apart all those young girls on the British taxpayers' money.
So if it's not money, then what is it? What are they looking for?
It's ideology, right?
It is ideology.
But they're looking for something, and they find it in that, I guess, is the question.
Yes, because there's a big hole in the heart of... I mean, what's fascinating to me is not the guys who come from Libya a couple of years ago. What's interesting to me is people born and bred in these Western
that are
nations,
already there,
and they feel nothing for the countries they're supposedly citizens of, because they're taught that their countries are racist, imperialist, colonialist. They're responsible for all the bad isms in the world. And the British political class, Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, to be totally laughable about it, also believes that Britain is evil and imperialist and colonialist and racist.
Mark, how do we wake up? Last night we went to bed thinking we were going to talk about climate change and us leaving the Paris Climate Accord. Our own Freedom Tower here lit up in green in solidarity with the environment. Yet I drive in this morning, the Freedom Tower not lit that way because the world wakes up to the reality of terrorism. How do our Western leaders come to terms with the fact that climate change is not the greatest threat we face, it's Islamism?
No, I'm not worried about sea levels in the Maldives in the year 2100 because those islands are Sunni Muslim and they'll all be living in Paris and London by the year 2100. So you can worry about that, which is a fatuous delusion. When Sadiq Khan says there's no reason for people to be alarmed, you look at not the 7 dead people, not the dozens of injured, but you look at the hundreds and thousands, the police bellowing at them out of control. Get out, get out, get out here. That's not how a British constable talks, or used to talk, having to walk around with your arms up in the air so that you're not mistaken for a terrorist and get shot. This is life in London in the second decade of the 21st century, and when Sadiq Khan says there's no reason to be alarmed, he's part of the problem and he should be out of a job.
He's the mayor of London. We heard from Theresa May, as we mentioned earlier this morning. She laid out 4 points. She laid out 4 different points that she wanted to address, one of which was spreading Western ideology, trying to get into the hearts. You mentioned these guys have holes in their hearts. They don't have a strong sense of purpose. For Western ideology, how do you fill that? I mean, how do you fill that vacuum?
Well, they always say that, oh, we will never surrender our values, and never say what they are.
What are their values?
I know, and so the values are like tomorrow, and I disagree with Abby here with respect. I think this pop concert is ridiculous. I think this idea that you get Ariana Grande and Justin Bieber and Katy Perry, and everyone holds hands and says all you need is love.
My point, Mark, is that you need to keep living. You need to not live in fear. You need to keep doing the things that you would normally do. This concert was already planned, so if they were to cancel that, that would mean we're changing our lives for what these terrorists did. I think that is coming across weak. That's not what we should do.
No, but you also have to give people a sense that they are part. I'm not ashamed to say it. Western civilization is the greatest civilizational inheritance on this planet. We've got 8 centuries of great stuff since Magna Carta. We've got Shakespeare, we've got Mozart, we've got Katy Perry, we've got all the good stuff. And the idea that we're somehow ashamed of it, and it is that. It's that for 2 generations now, and that's true here in the United States too, is if you raise people to be ashamed of their civilizational inheritance, some will seek new beliefs like climate change, but others will seek what these lunatics
that fill that sense of purpose that they're looking for.
I do love that you held up Katy Perry in the same light as